Book 6, Chapter 24, of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 24. No betrothal ceremony took place, and Natasha's engagement to Bolkonsky was not announced. Prince Andrew insisted on that. He said that as he was responsible for the delay, he ought to bear the whole burden of it, that he had given his word and bound himself forever, but that he did not wish to bind Natasha and gave her perfect freedom. If after 6 months she felt that she did not love him, she would have full right to reject him. Naturally, neither Natasha nor her parents wished to hear of this, but Prince Andrew was firm. He came every day to the Rostovs, but did not behave to Natasha as an affianced lover. He did not use the familiar thou, but said you to her, and kissed only her hand. After their engagement, quite different, intimate, and natural relations sprang up between them. It was as if they had not known each other till now. Both liked to recall how they had regarded each other when as yet they were nothing to one another. They felt themselves now quite different beings. Then they were artificial, now natural and sincere. At first, the family felt some constraint in intercourse with Prince Andrew. He seemed a man from another world, and for a long time Natasha trained the family to get used to him, proudly assuring them all that he only appeared to be different, but was really just like all of them, and that she was not afraid of him, and no one else ought to be. After a few days they grew accustomed to him, and without restraint in his presence pursued their usual way of life, in which he took his part. He could talk about rural economy with the Count, fashions with the Countess and Natasha, and about albums and fancy work with Sonia. Sometimes the household, both among themselves and in his presence, expressed their wonder at how it had all happened, and at the evident omens there had been of it. Prince Andrew's coming to Otradno and their coming to Petersburg, and the likeness between Natasha and Prince Andrew, which her nurse had noticed on his first visit, and Andrew's encounter with Nicholas in 1805, and many other incidents betokening that it had to be. In the house, that poetic dullness and quiet reigned which always accompanies the presence of a betrothed couple. Often, when all sitting together, everyone kept silent. Sometimes the others would get up and go away, and the couple, left alone, still remained silent. They rarely spoke of their future life. Prince Andrew was afraid and ashamed to speak of it. Natasha shared this as she did all his feelings, which she constantly divined. Once she began questioning him about his son. Prince Andrew blushed, as he often did now. Natasha particularly liked it in him, and said that his son would not live with them. "Why not?" asked Natasha in a frightened tone. "I cannot take him away from his grandfather. And besides—" "How I should have loved him!" said Natasha, immediately guessing his thought. "But I know you wish to avoid any pretext for finding fault with us." Sometimes the old Count would come up, kiss Prince Andrew, and ask his advice about Petya's education or Nicholas' service. The old Countess sighed as she looked at them. Sonia was always getting frightened lest she should be in the way, and tried to find excuses for leaving them alone even when they did not wish it. When Prince Andrew spoke, he could tell a story very well. Natasha listened to him with pride. When she spoke, she noticed with fear and joy that he gazed attentively and scrutinizingly at her. She asked herself in perplexity, "What does he look for in me? He is trying to discover something by looking at me. What if what he seeks in me is not there?" Sometimes she fell into one of the mad, merry moods characteristic of her, and then she particularly loved to hear and see how Prince Andrew laughed. He seldom laughed, but when he did, he abandoned himself entirely to his laughter, and after such a laugh she always felt nearer to him. Natasha would have been completely happy if the thought of this separation awaiting her and drawing near had not terrified her, just as the mere thought of it made him turn pale and cold. On the eve of his departure from Petersburg, Prince Andrew brought with him Pierre, who had not been to the Rostovs once since the ball. Pierre seemed disconcerted and embarrassed. He was talking to the Countess, and Natasha sat down beside a little chess table with Sonia, thereby inviting Prince Andrew to come too. He did so. "You have known Bezukov a long time?" he asked. "Do you like him?" "Yes, he's a dear, but very absurd." And as usual when speaking of Pierre, she began to tell anecdotes of his absent-mindedness, some of which had even been invented about him. "Do you know I have entrusted him with our secret? I have known him from childhood. He has a heart of gold. I beg you, Natalie," Prince Andrew said with sudden seriousness, "I am going away, and heaven knows what may happen. You may cease to— All right, I know I'm not to say that. Only this, then. Whatever may happen to you when I am not here— What can happen? Whatever trouble may come," Prince Andrew continued, "I beg you, Mademoiselle Sophie, whatever may happen, to turn to him alone for advice and help. He is a most absent-minded and absurd fellow, but he has a heart of gold." Neither her father, nor her mother, nor Sonia, nor Prince Andrew himself could have foreseen how the separation from her lover would act on Natasha. Flushed and agitated, she went about the house all that day, dry-eyed, occupied with most trivial matters, as if not understanding what awaited her. She did not even cry when, on taking leave, he kissed her hand for the last time. "Don't go," she said in a tone that made him wonder whether he really ought not to stay, which he remembered long afterwards. Nor did she cry when he was gone, but for several days she sat in her room dry-eyed, taking no interest in anything, and only saying now and then, "Oh, why did he go away?" But a fortnight after his departure, to the surprise of those around her, she recovered from her mental sickness just as suddenly and became her old self again, but with a change in her moral physiognomy, as a child gets up after a long illness with a changed expression of face. End of Book 6, Chapter 24. Book 6, Chapter 25, Of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 25. During that year after his son's departure, Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky's health and temper became much worse. He grew still more irritable, and it was Princess Mary who generally bore the brunt of his frequent fits of unprovoked anger. He seemed carefully to seek out her tender spots so as to torture her mentally as harshly as possible. Princess Mary had two passions and consequently two joys, her nephew, little Nicholas, and religion, and these were the favorite subjects of the prince's attacks and ridicule. Whatever was spoken of he would bring round to the superstitiousness of old maids, or the petting and spoiling of children. "You want to make him, little Nicholas, into an old maid like yourself. A pity. Prince Andrew wants a son and not an old maid," he would say. Or, turning to Mademoiselle Bourienne, he would ask her in Princess Mary's presence how she liked our village priests and icons, and would joke about them. He continually hurt Princess Mary's feelings and tormented her, but it cost her no effort to forgive him. Could he be to blame toward her, or could her father, whom she knew loved her in spite of it all, be unjust? And what is justice? The princess never thought of that proud word justice. All the complex laws of man centered for her in one clear and simple law, the law of love and self-sacrifice taught us by him who lovingly suffered for mankind though he himself was God. What had she to do with the justice or injustice of other people? She had to endure and love, and that she did. During the winter, Prince Andrew had come to Bald Hills, and had been gay, gentle, and more affectionate than Princess Mary had known him for a long time past. She felt that something had happened to him, but he said nothing to her about his love. Before he left, He had a long talk with his father about something, and Princess Mary noticed that before his departure they were dissatisfied with one another. Soon after Prince Andrew had gone, Princess Mary wrote to her friend Julie Karagina in Petersburg, whom she had dreamed, as all girls dream, of marrying to her brother, and who was at that time in mourning for her own brother killed in Turkey. "Sorrow, it seems, is our common lot, my dear, tender friend Julie. Your loss is so terrible that I can only explain it to myself as a special providence of God, who, loving you, wishes to try you and your excellent mother. Oh, my friend, religion and religion alone can, I will not say comfort us, but save us from despair. Religion alone can explain to us what without its help man cannot comprehend. Why, for what cause, kind and noble beings able to find happiness in life, not merely harming no one, but necessary to the happiness of others, are called away to God, while cruel, useless, harmful persons, or such as are a burden to themselves and to others, are left living. The first death I saw, and one I shall never forget, that of my dear sister-in-law, left that impression on me. Just as you asked Destiny why your splendid brother had to die, so I asked why that angel Lisa, who not only never wronged anyone, but in whose soul there were never any unkind thoughts, had to die. And what do you think, dear friend? 5 years have passed since then, and already I, with my petty understanding, begin to see clearly why she had to die, and in what way that death was but an expression of the infinite goodness of the Creator, whose every action, though generally incomprehensible to us, is but a manifestation of his infinite love for his creatures. Perhaps, I often think, she was too angelically innocent to have the strength to perform all a mother's duties. As a young wife, she was irreproachable. Perhaps she could not have been so as a mother. As it is, not only has she left us, and particularly Prince Andrew, with the purest regrets and memories, but probably she will there receive a place I dare not hope for myself. But do not speak of her alone. That early and terrible death has had the most beneficent influence on me and on my brother, in spite of all our grief. Then, at the moment of our loss, these thoughts could not occur to me. I should then have dismissed them with horror, but now they are very clear and certain. I write all this to you, dear friend, only to convince you of the gospel truth which has become for me a principle of life. Not a single hair of our heads will fall without His will. And His will is governed only by infinite love for us, and so whatever befalls us is for our good. You ask whether we shall spend next winter in Moscow. In spite of my wish to see you, I do not think so, and do not want to do so. You will be surprised to hear that the reason for this is Bonaparte. The case is this. My father's health is growing noticeably worse. He cannot stand any contradiction and is becoming irritable. This irritability is, as you know, chiefly directed to political questions. He cannot endure the notion that Bonaparte is negotiating on equal terms with all the sovereigns of Europe, and particularly with our own, the grandson of the great Catherine. As you know, I am quite indifferent to politics, but from my father's remarks and his talks with Michael Ivanovitch, I know all that goes on in the world, and especially about the honors conferred on Bonaparte, who only at Bald Hills, in the whole world it seems, is not accepted as a great man, still less as Emperor of France. And my father cannot stand this. It seems to me that it is chiefly because of his political views that my father is reluctant to speak of going to Moscow, for he foresees the encounters that would result from his way of expressing his views regardless of anybody. All the benefit he might derive from a course of treatment he would lose as a result of the disputes about Bonaparte, which would be inevitable. In any case, it will be decided very shortly. Our family life goes on in the old way, except for my brother Andrew's absence. He, as I wrote you before, has changed very much of late. After his sorrow, he only this year quite recovered his spirits. He has again become as I used to know him when a child, kind, affectionate, with that heart of gold to which I know no equal. He has realized, it seems to me, that life is not over for him. But together with his mental change, he has grown physically much weaker. He has become thinner and more nervous. I am anxious about him, and glad he is taking this trip abroad which the doctors recommended long ago. I hope it will cure him. You write that in Petersburg he is spoken of as one of the most active, cultivated, and capable of the young men. Forgive my vanity as a relation, but I never doubted it. The good he has done to everybody here, from his peasants up to the gentry, is incalculable. On his arrival in Petersburg, he received only his due. I always wonder at the way rumors fly from Petersburg to Moscow, especially such false ones as that you write about. I mean the report of my brother's betrothal to the little Rostova. I do not think my brother will ever marry again, and certainly not her. And this is why. First, I know that, though he rarely speaks about the wife he has lost, the grief of that loss has gone too deep in his heart for him ever to decide to give her a successor and our little angel a stepmother. Secondly, because, as far as I know, that girl is not the kind of girl who could please Prince Andrew. I do not think he would choose her for a wife, and frankly, I do not wish it. But I am running on too long, and am at the end of my second sheet. Goodbye, my dear friend. May God keep you in his holy and mighty care. My dear friend, Mademoiselle Bourienne sends you kisses. Mary. End of Book 6, Chapter 25. Book 6, Chapter 26, of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 26. In the middle of the summer, Princess Mary received an unexpected letter from Prince Andrew in Switzerland, in which he gave her strange and surprising news. He informed her of his engagement to Natasha Rostova. The whole letter breathed loving rapture for his betrothed, and tender and confiding affection for his sister. He wrote that he had never loved as he did now, and that only now did he understand and know what life was. He asked his sister to forgive him for not having told her of his resolve when he had last visited Bald Hills, though he had spoken of it to his father. He had not done so for fear Princess Mary should ask her father to give his consent, irritating him and having to bear the brunt of his displeasure without attaining her object. Besides, he wrote, the matter was not then so definitely settled as it is now. My father then insisted on a delay of a year, and now already 6 months, half of that period has passed, and my resolution is firmer than ever. If the doctors did not keep me here at the spas, I should be back in Russia, but as it is, I have to postpone my return for 3 months. You know me and my relations with father. I want nothing from him. I have been, and always shall be, independent. But to go against his will and arouse his anger, now that he may perhaps remain with us such a short time, would destroy half my happiness. I am now writing to him about the same question, and beg you to choose a good moment to hand him the letter, and to let me know how he looks at the whole matter, and whether there is hope that he may consent to reduce the term by 4 months. After long hesitations, doubts, and prayers, Princess Mary gave the letter to her father. The next day the old prince said to her quietly, "Write and tell your brother to wait till I am dead. It won't be long. I shall soon set him free." The princess was about to reply, but her father would not let her speak, and raising his voice more and more, cried, "Mary, Mary, my boy! A good family! Clever people, eh? Rich, eh? Yes, a nice stepmother little Nicholas will have. Write and tell him he may marry tomorrow if he likes. She will be little Nicholas' stepmother, and I'll marry Bourienne. "Ha ha ha! He mustn't be without a stepmother either. Only one thing, no more women are wanted in my house. Let him marry and live by himself. Perhaps you will go and live with him too," he added, turning to Princess Mary. "Go, in heaven's name! Go out into the frost! The frost! The frost!" After this outburst, the prince did not speak any more about the matter, but repressed vexation at his son's poor-spirited behavior found expression in his treatment of his daughter. To his former pretext for irony a fresh one was now added: allusions to stepmothers and amiabilities to Mademoiselle Bourienne. "Why shouldn't I marry her?" he asked his daughter. "She'll make a splendid princess." And latterly, to her surprise and bewilderment, Princess Mary noticed that her father was really associating more and more with the Frenchwoman. She wrote to Prince Andrew about the reception of his letter, but comforted him with the hopes of reconciling their father to the idea. Little Nicholas and his education, her brother Andrew, and religion were Princess Mary's joys and consolations. But besides that, since everyone must have personal hopes, Princess Mary in the profoundest depths of her heart had a hidden dream and hope that supplied the chief consolation of her life. This comforting dream and hope were given her by God's folk, the half-witted and other pilgrims who visited her without the prince's knowledge. The longer she lived, the more experience and observation she had of life, the greater was her wonder at the short-sightedness of men who seek enjoyment and happiness here on earth, toiling, suffering, struggling, and harming one another to obtain that impossible, visionary, sinful happiness. Prince Andrew had loved his wife. She died, but that was not enough. He wanted to bind his happiness to another woman. Her father objected to this because he wanted a more distinguished and wealthier match for Andrew, and they all struggled and suffered and tormented one another and injured their souls, their eternal souls, for the attainment of benefits which endure but for an instant. Not only do we know this ourselves, but Christ, the Son of God, came down to earth and told us that this life is but for a moment and is a probation. Yet we cling to it and think to find happiness in it. How is it that no one realizes this? Thought Prince Mary. No one except these despised God's folk, who, wallet on back, come to me by the back door, afraid of being seen by the prince, not for fear of ill usage by him, but for fear of causing him to sin. To leave family, home, and all the cares of worldly welfare, in order, without clinging to anything, to wander in hempen rags from place to place under an assumed name, doing no one any harm but praying for all, for those who drive one away as well as for those who protect one. Higher than that life and truth, there is no life or truth. There was one pilgrim, a quiet, pock-marked little woman of 50 called Theodosia, who for over 30 years had gone about barefoot and worn heavy chains. Princess Mary was particularly fond of her. Once, when in a room with a lamp dimly lit before the icon, Theodosia was talking of her life. The thought that Theodosia alone had found the true path of life suddenly came to Princess Mary with such force that she resolved to become a pilgrim herself. When Theodosia had gone to sleep, Princess Mary thought about this for a long time, and at last made up her mind that, strange as it might seem, she must go on a pilgrimage. She disclosed this thought to no one but to her confessor, Father Akinfi the monk, and he approved of her intention. Under guise of a present for the pilgrims, Princess Mary prepared a pilgrim's complete costume for herself: a coarse smock, bast shoes, a rough coat, and a black kerchief. Often, approaching the chest of drawers containing this secret treasure, Princess Mary paused, uncertain whether the time had not already come to put her project into execution. Often, listening to the pilgrims' tales, she was so stimulated by their simple speech, mechanical to them but to her so full of deep meaning, that several times she was on the point of abandoning everything and running away from home. In imagination, she already pictured herself by Theodosia's side, dressed in coarse rags, walking with a staff, a wallet on her back along the dusty road, directing her wanderings from one saint's shrine to another, free from envy, earthly love, or desire, and reaching at last the place where there is no more sorrow or sighing, but eternal joy and bliss. I shall come to a place and pray there, and before having time to get used to it or getting to love it, I shall go farther. I will go on till my legs fail, and I'll lie down and die somewhere, and shall at last reach that eternal, quiet haven where there is neither sorrow nor sighing, thought Princess Mary. But afterwards, when she saw her father, and especially little Coco, Nicholas, her resolve weakened. She wept quietly, and felt that she was a sinner who loved her father and little nephew more than God. End of Book 6, Chapter 26.